Dear listeners of my channel, now we all live in very difficult times, and situations can be different. I find myself in a situation where I urgently need funds, so I will be very grateful to anyone who will support me and help me with any amount acceptable to you. The requisites for help are in the description. An ancient scripture says, there are no external objects in our reality. They all exist only in consciousness, like a dream or miraculously created images. Both the world of forms and the formless world are the result of a special kind of consciousness called imagination. Therefore, although any phenomenon certainly seems real enough to us, the actual possible reality, according to the ancient doctrine, becomes a real perception only where we focus our attention and fix our sense on the focused object. In other words, what we perceive as everyday reality is really just a form of collective dream. Barring some differences in terminology, this ancient tradition is much like the theories of virtual reality that are emerging these days. But whether we subscribe to the old or the new way of thinking, we are inextricably woven into the fabric of reality itself. Here and there, it is only through interaction while we are asleep that the possibilities of our minds become the reality of the world. From whatever perspective, both ancient traditions and modern science invite us to think of ourselves not as outsiders mysteriously thrown into earthly reality for the purpose of learning about it, but as part of that reality, inseparable from it. We will get some idea of how deep the interaction and interpenetration between us and reality is if we imagine a similar relationship between a drop of water and the ocean in which it is located. Even if it is possible to separate the drop from the ocean, it is generally very difficult to identify where the drop ends and the ocean begins, and vice versa. In essence, just as the ocean and the drop are inseparable and form one whole, so too are we an inseparable part of the reality we create. What makes both virtual reality and dream ideas so appealing is the unmistakable similarity between them in their approach to how reality operates. We don't just play a role in reality, we play a major role in what is called the co-creating universe. We as participants, by the act of focusing our consciousness, the act of observing and learning about the world, are doing the act of creation itself. We are those who observe. We are those who study the world. And wherever we look, our consciousness creates something available to our perception. The common element, one might say the core of the ideas presented here, is that we are all part of this equation in a co-creative universe. We are the catalysts of the events of our lives, and we cognize and empathize with what we have created. Both are happening at the same time. If we are creators and cognizers of our own creation, then the question begs to be asked: if our interactions with the universe are constantly creating and modifying the world, how do we know which interactions create which results? In other words, what are the laws by which our reality operates? And do we have the wisdom to recognize these laws when we see them? Or have we perhaps already found these laws? Do the already known laws of physics not indicate how reality actually functions? If so, then as scientists unravel the mysteries of nature, they may be unknowingly showing us the spiritual keys to our power as well. And if we are to have any luck along the way, we must, in the process of verifying and testing these true laws, take into account everything we encounter, including anomalies and phenomena that don't always match up with what the theories predict. Often, it is the anomalies that turn out to be the keys to understanding the actions of these phenomena. Over the past 300 years or more, scientists have proposed, tested, and modified their explanations for both the structure of the universe and for what, for example, gravity and light are and how they work. The problem is that all their efforts have led us to have two very different sets of laws describing different aspects of the same reality: classical and quantum physics. The laws discovered by Newton in 1687 laid the foundation for a field of science called classical physics. Enriched in the late 1800s by James Maxwell's theories of electricity and magnetism, and then in the early 1900s by Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, classical physics has been hugely successful in explaining the large-scale phenomena available to our eyes, like the motion of planets and galaxies and apples falling from trees. It has served us so effectively that today we can calculate the orbits of space satellites and even landmen on the moon. However, during the 1900s, two areas where Newton's laws apparently do not apply were identified: the macrocosm of galaxies and the microcosm of quantum particles. Until then, we simply did not have the technical means at our disposal to look into the subatomic world or to observe how atoms behave at the birth of a distant star. In both the macro and micro worlds, scientists began to notice phenomena unexplainable from the point of view of the laws of classical physics. Sometimes, for example, a quantum of energy manifests itself as a particle and acts in the same way as particles usually do. In this case, it obeys the physical laws that scientists use to describe individual objects. The world appears as it should, and everyone is happy. The next time, however, a quantum of energy seemingly violates these laws. It simultaneously manifests itself in many places at once, interacts with both the past and the future, and even, depending on the situation, transitions from one state, the state of real particles, to another, the state of invisible, non-material waves. And it is precisely this behavior of the energy quantum that changes everything radically. Since we appear to be formed from the same substance that flouts all the laws of classical physics that describe the world, this behavior changes the laws that govern us as we see ourselves in the world. And to explain these exceptions, a new field of physics had to emerge: quantum physics. The difference between how the quantum world works and how the everyday world works has led to two schools of thought among scientists, and each school has its own theories to support its postulates. The greatest task before us is to unite these two different ways of thinking into a single worldview, into a single view, into a unified theory of the universe. To accomplish this task requires something to link the macro and micro worlds in a way that we are only just beginning to grasp. Although the idea that our beliefs and everyday reality are inextricably linked is not at all new, scientific proof of their connection was unexpectedly obtained in 1909 in a single experiment. The experiment itself is quite simple, but it led to a new kind of thinking, visionary thinking, with results so surprising that we still discuss them to this day. Probably, even the scientists who conducted this now famous experiment with two slits did not know how dramatically their discovery would affect their lives, the whole world, and the future of our planet. And how could they have known? They were simply conducting a scientific experiment to study the substance from which everything is formed, the quantum particles of our bodies and the universe. In 1998, scientists repeated this experiment and confirmed once again the fact that it is possible to influence photons by simply observing them, and found that the longer the observation, the more the observer influences the behavior of particles. The 1998 experiment is very important for our everyday life because of the following irrefutable facts. Our bodies and the world are formed from the same quantum substance that was changing as we observed it during the experiment. We are all observers. This means that how we look at the world and what we believe when we look at it can no longer be discounted or written off as something of no consequence. In fact, experiments show that consciousness is the substance from which the entire universe is formed. However much we try to detect the smallest particles of matter and find the very edge of the universe, the relationship between observation and reality suggests that we will apparently never find either. No matter how deeply and intently we gaze into the quantum world of the atom, or how far into the vastness of space, the very fact that we look, full of hope, expectation, and faith in the existence of something, may be the act that creates the something we see. Both ancient texts and quantum theory agree that in the invisible worlds, we create a blueprint of all the connections, actions, successes, and failures of the visible world. From this perspective, our reality is like a vast cosmic screen that allows us to see how the non-physical energy of our emotions and beliefs, anger, hatred, and rage, as well as love, compassion, and understanding, are projected into the physical environment of life. This is probably why we are said to possess the most powerful force in the universe and direct access to the universe itself from the moment we are born. What could be more powerful and influential than the ability to change the world and life itself by changing what we believe with our minds and hearts? Such power seems almost fairy tale-like. Perhaps that is why we are drawn to such things. They awaken the dormant memory in us of our power in this world and our ability to turn our reality into a so-called heaven or hell of our own choosing. Subscribe to the channel. There are many more interesting things to come.